"Stand aside for your sovereign," Duke Garrick Sorrel said. And when Tam Holloway did not stand aside, the Duke put both hands flat on his chest and shoved. I was 8 feet away at the second pillar, and I saw the whole thing the way you see lightning. All at once, every detail burned in before the sound arrives. The Duke's gloved hands, the gold thread on his cuffs catching the candlelight, Tam's heels not moving so much as a hair on the worn green carpet that ran the length of the great aisle to the throne. And above us all, on the high dais, the empty chair with the crown waiting on its cushion, and the young woman in white who had walked half that aisle already to be made our queen. I am Corporal Jory Cant, and I have stood the aisle of the Crown Abbey of Orenhull for 11 years. I have stood it for 2 royal weddings, a state funeral that emptied the city into the streets, and more solemn nothings than I can count. I had never, in all that time, seen a man lay hands on a sentry in the abbey itself, on the morning a crown was to be set on a head. I had certainly never seen it done by a duke of the realm in front of 3,000 witnesses and the whole assembled court. He shoved Tam Holloway, and Tam held, and the entire cathedral seemed to stop breathing at once. You have to understand what the aisle is on a coronation morning, or none of what came after will mean anything to you. The aisle is a road, but it is also a rule. From the great west doors to the foot of the dais runs a corridor of green carpet, and along its edge, every 12 feet, stands one of us, bearskin, white gloves, the rifle grounded, eyes forward. We are not there to fight. On a day like that one, there are 40 of us along the aisle, and not one of us is meant to do anything but stand. We are the banks of the river. The procession is the water. The queen-to-be walks down the center alone, slow as a tide, and the whole realm watches her come. And the only thing the 40 of us do is hold the shape of the road so that nothing can come into it that does not belong. Tam Holloway held the post nearest the chancel step, the last sentry, the one a person would have to get past to reach the dais and the throne. It was the place of honor and the place of trust, and Tam had been given it because Tam was the steadiest man I have ever served beside. He was not large. He was not fierce. He had a quiet, square way of standing that made you feel the ground under him went down a long way. And Duke Garrick Sorrel had just put his hands on that man's chest and shoved him, and was now leaning in close, his face gone a dangerous color, saying it again. "Stand aside. I will not say it a third time." Tam said nothing. Tam did not so much as turn his eyes from the middle distance, where a sentry's eyes are trained to stay. He had taken the shove the way a door frame takes a slammed door, a small shutter absorbed and given back to the stone, and he had not given the Duke 1 inch of the green carpet. I want to tell you I understood in that first instant what the Duke intended. I did not. None of us did. We thought, the way you think when a thing is too large to fit in your head, that it was a mistake, that the Duke was drunk or addled with old grievance, or had simply lost his bearings in the enormous solemnity of the morning, and would, in a heartbeat, come back to himself and step away in horror at what he had done. He did not come back to himself. He had not lost his bearings at all. Duke Garrick Sorrel knew exactly where he was, and exactly what the empty chair on the dais was, and exactly what he meant to do about it. He meant to sit in it. I learned the shape of his grievance later in pieces, the way you always learn the shapes of these things from the equerries, from the older sergeants, from the long murmuring of the court in the weeks after. The crown that morning was to go to Ilara, eldest child of the old king who had died in the winter. There was no question of her right. There had been no question of it for 20 years. But Garrick Sorrel was a cousin of the late king, a duke of the Western Marches, a man whose house had once, 4 generations back, held the throne for a single short reign before it passed sideways to the line that became Ilara's. And Garrick Sorrel had spent his whole life nursing the idea that the sideways pass had been a theft, and that the crown was, by some older and purer reckoning that lived only in his own breast, his. For 20 years it had stayed an idea, a bitter old man's fancy, muttered over wine, humored by no one. But the old king's death had cracked something in him, and on the morning the crown was to be set on a young woman's head, Garrick Sorrel decided that an idea muttered over wine for 20 years was a claim, and that a claim, pressed hard enough in front of enough people, became a fact. So he had walked into the abbey in his finest, taken his appointed seat among the dukes, and watched Elara begin her long walk down the aisle toward the chair he believed was his. And somewhere in that walk, the watching had become unbearable to him, and he had risen and stepped into the green corridor that no one steps into, and started up the aisle behind her, fast, with the long stride of a tall man, gaining toward the dais, toward the throne, toward the crown on its cushion. And the last sentry on the aisle, the steadiest man I ever served beside, had stepped 1/2 pace to his left to fill the road and stopped him. That was the shove I saw. That was the lightning. Garrick Sorrel, 3 strides from the chancel step with the whole realm watching, had run into Tam Holloway the way a wave runs into a sea wall, and now he was leaning into him with both hands, his face dark, hissing at a man who would not look at him to stand aside for his sovereign. The queen-to-be had stopped on the carpet. I could see her past the duke's shoulder, half-turned, very still in her white. She did not cry out. She did not run forward or shrink back. She looked at the back of the duke's head and at the white gloves of the man holding the road, and whatever she was feeling she kept it off her face, which I have always thought, looking back, was the first kingly thing she did that morning, before any crown touched her at all. And I, 8 feet away, at the second pillar, felt my own hand tighten on my rifle and my own weight come forward onto the balls of my feet, and I understood, the way you understand a drop opening under you, that the holding of this was not going to be mine. It was going to be Tam's. He was the road, he was the wall. He was the one the Duke had chosen to break, because Tam was the last thing between Garrick Sorrel and the chair, and the only way to the chair now ran straight through a corporal of the guard who would not move. 40 of us stood the aisle that morning. For the next long minute, the whole weight of a kingdom's future rested on whether one of us, the quiet square one nearest the step, would hold his post against a man determined to take a throne by shoving. He held it, but I am getting ahead of the morning, and you deserve to feel it the way we felt it, 1 terrible inch at a time. The first inch was silence, not the silence of an empty room, the silence of 3,000 people all deciding, in the same breath, not to make a sound. The choir had stopped. The great organ had cut off mid-chord on a signal no one gave, and the held note died slowly up in the vaulting and left nothing behind it. Into that nothing, Garrick Sorrel's voice came again, low and venomous, meant for Tam alone but carrying in that stone the way a dropped coin carries. Do you know who I am? It is the oldest question a powerful man asks, and it is always the wrong one because the answer that matters is never the one he wants. Tam knew exactly who he was. So did I. We had been read the morning's order of precedence at dawn the way we were every great occasion, every duke, every minister, every foreign envoy where each would sit, who would rise and when. Garrick Sorrel had been a name on that list, near the top, with a fine seat among the Marcher lords. He was a duke of the realm. He was also, that morning, a man standing in the one place in the kingdom where it did not matter in the slightest what he was, because the road was not his. Tam answered him the only way a sentry answers anything. He did not. The Duke's hands were still flat against the red wool of Tam's tunic. I watched his fingers curl, gathering the cloth, and I watched the knuckles whiten, and I understood he was about to try strength, that the words had failed, and now he would simply move the man bodily out of his way, the way he had no doubt moved 100 lesser obstacles in a long life of being a duke. He set his weight and he heaved. Tam did not move. I have thought about that a great deal since, how a tall, furious man in his full strength can throw his whole body against another and accomplish nothing. It looks, from the outside, like magic. It is not magic. It is engineering and it is will. Tam had dropped his weight the instant the hands first touched him. His back foot was braced against the lip of the chancel step behind him. The line of his bones ran straight down into the floor of an abbey that had stood 800 years. The Duke was shoving against the building. He simply did not know it yet. He knew it after the heave. I saw it cross his face, the flicker of disbelief, then something worse, the dawning of a man who has always gotten his way, discovering in front of a watching kingdom that he is not going to get it now. That flicker is a dangerous thing in a proud man. It is the moment he stops being merely arrogant and becomes desperate, and desperate is when the trouble truly starts. "You will let me pass," he said, and his voice cracked up out of its low register into something thinner, "or I will have you flogged. I will have your name struck from the rolls. I will have your children turned out of their house. Do you hear me? Stand aside." Tam heard him. Tam's eyes did not move from the middle distance. And I, 8 feet off, felt the strangest thing rise in my chest, not fear, though there was plenty to fear, but a kind of fierce and aching pride, because I knew what those threats cost a man to ignore, and I knew Tam was ignoring every one of them as if they were rain on the window. Here is what you must understand about the threats. They were not empty. Garrick Sorrel could not take the throne, we all knew that already, even if he did not, but a Duke of the Western Marches could absolutely ruin a corporal of the guard if he set his mind to it. He could make a man's life small and hard and frightened. Tam had a wife. Tam had 2 boys, one of them not yet walking. Every word the Duke hissed at him was a real stone aimed at a real and breakable life, and Tam stood there and let them break against him and did not so much as blink, because between the dais and the Duke there was nothing but Tam Holloway, and Tam Holloway had decided that nothing would be enough. Down the aisle behind us, I felt the 40 begin to wake. You cannot see it if you are not one of us. We do not move. But I felt it the way you feel a regiment come to readiness. A tightening that runs man to man down a line, each sentry registering that the unthinkable was happening at the chancel step, and each one settling his weight, squaring his shoulders by a degree no eye could measure, becoming, very quietly, ready. If the Duke broke past Tam, he would not find an open road to the throne. He would find 39 more men, and behind them the household troops at the dais, and behind them a captain who would by then have given the only order that mattered. But all of that was contingency. All of that was if. The whole point of the aisle, the whole reason for the 40 of us was that it should never come to if. The road should hold at the first wall. The first wall was Tam. And then Garrick Sorrel made the mistake that ended him, though it would take the rest of the morning to finish. He reached past Tam. He could not move the man, so he tried to go around him, lunged to Tam's right, toward the gap between the last sentry and the chancel pillar, one long arm flung out toward the steps and the dais and the crown above. It was the act of a man who had stopped thinking and started only wanting, and it forced the thing none of us wanted, the thing the whole still architecture of the aisle existed to prevent. It forced the sentry to act. Tam acted. I want to be precise about this, because the whole meaning of the morning lives in exactly how he did it. He did not strike the Duke. He did not throw him down or wrestle him or raise his rifle. What Tam did was step, a single hard lateral pace to his own right, into the gap, refilling the road with his body before the Duke's reaching arm could become a reaching body. And as he stepped, he brought the grounded rifle up across his own chest, both gloved hands on it, holding it level and crosswise like a bar, like the rail of a fence. Not a weapon pointed, a barrier presented. The Duke's lunge ran into the flat of that crosswise rifle the way it had run into Tam's chest, and stopped, and Garrick Sorrel, off balance now, arm flung out, dignity gone, staggered back a half step into the open green of the aisle, in full view of 3,000 witnesses and his queen, and very nearly fell. He did not fall. I almost wish he had. It would have been kinder than what his own pride did to him in the next instant. He caught himself, and he straightened, and he looked down at his own gloved hands as if they belonged to someone else, and then he looked up the aisle at the watching kingdom, and I saw the exact moment he understood that every eye in the Crown Abbey of Orenhull was now upon him. Not upon the Queen, not upon the crown, upon him. and that what they were seeing was not a sovereign claiming his throne but a furious old man who had just been stopped cold, twice, by a single corporal who had not even looked at him. The crowd had begun to make a sound, not a roar. Something lower and more frightening to a proud man than any roar, a long, rolling murmur of disbelief and disgust, 3,000 people turning in the same breath against the man in the aisle. I have heard crowds cheer and I have heard them weep. I had never until that morning heard a crowd decide, altogether and almost silently, that it was ashamed of someone. It is a terrible sound to be on the wrong end of. And up on the dais, behind the empty chair, I saw the Lord Chamberlain rise from his place, his white staff of office in his hand, his old face gone hard as a closed door, and I knew that the contingency had become the present, and that whatever was going to happen to Duke Garrick Sorrel had just begun to happen. But it did not begin fast. That is the part I find hardest to make people believe, when I tell this, how slow it all was, how each beat of it stretched out long enough to live a small lifetime in. The Lord Chamberlain rose, but he was an old man at the far end of a long dais, and there was the breadth of the chancel and the steps between him and the aisle. The household troops at the foot of the dais were already coming to the ready, but they had been placed to guard the Queen's person at the throne, not to come charging down into a packed congregation. For a few seconds that felt like minutes, the only thing standing between a desperate duke and the crown was still, exactly, Tam Holloway and his crosswise rifle and his eyes fixed on nothing at all. And Garrick Sorrel, hearing that terrible ashamed murmur swell behind him, feeling the whole tide of the morning turn against him, did the thing that desperate men do when the great prize slips. He stopped reaching for the throne. He turned instead on the one obstacle he could actually put his hands on Tam. This, he said, and now he was shouting, his voice gone ragged and public, playing not to Tam at all but to the watching court, to the dukes in their seats, to anyone he imagined might still be persuaded that he was a wronged sovereign rather than a stopped old man. This is what they have set in my path. A servant, a painted servant in a fur hat, raised up to deny a prince of the blood his birthright. Look at him. He will not even meet my eye. Is this your justice? Is this the kingdom you would crown? One where a corporal stands between a duke and his own crown. It was a good speech in its way. Garrick Sorrel had been a powerful man his whole life, and he knew how to throw words at a crowd. And if there had been any doubt in that abbey, any faction, any old Western loyalty quietly hoping the Marcher Lord might somehow have the right of it, that speech was the moment it might have caught. A clever villain wins exactly that kind of moment, by making the wronged man look like the tyrant and the obstacle look like the crime. He did not win it. He did not win it because of what Tam did next, which was nothing, and because of what the realm did next, which was everything. What Tam did was lower the rifle. Slowly, deliberately. Once the Duke had turned to face him and was no longer lunging for the steps, once the road behind Tam was no longer threatened, Tam brought the crosswise rifle back down and grounded it again at his side, but to the floor, in the parade rest of a sentry on a quiet morning. He had presented the barrier only as long as the barrier was needed, and the instant it was not, he put it away. He stood square in the gap that was now his post, hands at the rifle, eyes forward, and he gave the shouting Duke nothing, not a flinch, not a glare, not the smallest twitch of a man being provoked. He simply went back to being the road. I cannot tell you how loud that silence of his was. Garrick Sorrel was screaming at him about painted servants and stolen birthrights, working himself white, and Tam Holloway stood there like a stone that had heard a great deal of weather in its time and was not impressed by this particular storm. And the contrast did in 3 seconds what no speech of ours could have done in an hour. It showed 3,000 people, with perfect clarity, which of the 2 men in that aisle was the disordered one. The one bellowing about his rights, red-faced, his fine clothes in disarray, his dignity shed all over the green carpet, and the one standing quiet in his post, having harmed no one, having only refused to step out of the way of a man trying to seize a throne by force. That was when the realm moved. It moved first as a single voice. Out of the great congregation, somewhere off to my left among the lesser seats, a man stood up, an old soldier, I learned afterward, a sergeant of the line 40 years retired, who had come to the coronation in his one good coat with his old campaign ribbons on it. And he called out, in the cracked carrying voice of a man used to a parade ground, 3 words into the ashamed silence. "Hold the line." That was all, hold the line, the thing you say to a man at a post, and it broke something open in the abbey. Another voice answered it, and another, and within a breath there was a low chant of it rolling around that ancient stone, hundreds of voices, the whole congregation on the side of the silent corporal and against the shouting duke. Hold the line, not a riot, never a riot but a verdict. The realm, given its choice between the prince and the painted servant, had chosen the painted servant, because the painted servant was the only man in the aisle behaving as if the day still meant something. And then the great ones moved too. The Lord Chamberlain had reached the head of the steps. He raised his white staff, and into a sudden hush, for a herald's training can quiet even that, he spoke, and his old voice did not shake. "Duke Garrick Sorrel, you have laid hands upon a sentry of the crown in the crown's own house, on the morning of the crown's own anointing. You have broken the peace of the coronation. By the authority of this office, you are commanded to withdraw and submit yourself to the king's." He caught himself, and the catch was the most chilling thing in it, because it told the whole abbey how certain the outcome already was, to the queen's justice. I felt the household troops start down the steps then, 4 of them, unhurried, terrible in their unhurriedness. And I saw Garrick Sorrel turn his head and look at them coming, and look back up the aisle at the dais and the chair, and the crown he was never, now, going to touch. And I watched the last of it go out of him, the certainty, the long-nursed dream of 20 bitter years, the whole edifice of his belief that wanting a thing badly enough for long enough made it yours. It went out of him all at once, and what was left was just an old man standing in an aisle, having ruined himself in front of everyone he had ever wished to impress. He had one move left, and to his lasting shame he tried it. As the household men reached the foot of the aisle, Garrick Sorrel spun back toward Tam, toward the one body still close enough to seize, and made a last grab, both hands, not for the throne now but for the rifle itself, to wrench it from the sentry's grip, I think, and brandish it, and turn the whole thing into the brawl he needed it to be so that he might still be the wronged man fighting his way to his rights. He got his hands on the barrel. For half a heartbeat the 2 of them were locked, the Duke heaving with all his weight, Tam absolutely still around the weapon as if it had grown out of the floor. And I came off the 2nd pillar at last, I and the sentry from the 3rd pillar both. We broke our posts because the moment had finally and truly demanded it, and we were 2 strides away, close enough to see the spittle on the Duke's lip and the calm in Tam's eyes when Tam ended it himself, without us, in the only way the day would allow. He let go. He simply opened both gloved hands and released the rifle, and stepped back one clean pace out of the Duke's reach, and let Garrick Sorrel keep his prize. It was the wisest thing I have ever seen a man do under pressure, and I did not understand it for a full second. Then I did, and the cleverness of it took my breath. A coronation rifle on a parade morning carries no round in the chamber. We are sentries of honor, not riflemen of the line, and every man on the aisle that day stood with an empty weapon and a full heart. Tam knew that. The Duke did not. By letting go, Tam handed Garrick Sorrel an empty, useless length of polished wood and steel, and turned, in that instant, the wronged man fighting for his rights that the Duke so badly needed into something else entirely. A wild old man clutching a soldier's rifle in a holy place, having torn it from a corporal who had done nothing but let it go. There is no version of that picture in which the Duke is the hero. Tam had seen the only way the day could be saved, not by winning the struggle but by refusing to have won, and he had taken it instantly, with no one's leave at the cost of looking, for one heartbeat, like a man who had been overpowered. He had given up the appearance of strength to protect the substance of the morning. I have served 11 years, and I am not sure I would have had the wit or the nerve. Garrick Sorrel stood there holding the rifle, and the abbé looked at him holding it, and he felt the picture settle over him like cold water. He had wanted a throne. He had been given, instead, a stage on which to be exactly what he was, in front of everyone whose good opinion he had spent his life craving. He looked down at the weapon in his hands. He looked at Tam, standing empty-handed and calm a pace away. And for the first time all morning, Duke Garrick Sorrel ran out of things to do. The household men took him then. 2 at each arm, gently, that was the order. I learned later, gentle hands, no roughness, give the watching realm nothing to pity him for, and they did not so much drag him as fold him in, the way you take a man who has had bad news, and they turned him back down the aisle toward the great west doors. He did not fight them. The fight had all run out the moment Tam let go of the rifle. The most senior of the 4, a gray sergeant of the household, lifted the rifle from the Duke's loosened hands as easily as taking a toy from a sleeping child, and turned and walked it back the 4 paces, and held it out to Tam Holloway. And Tam came to attention and received it, both gloved hands, grounded it once more at his side, and resumed his post in the gap he had never truly left. That should have been the end of it. The Duke removed, the road held, the realm's verdict given, the crown still waiting on its cushion. The Lord Chamberlain need only have nodded, and the organ taken up its broken chord, and the Queen-to-be completed her interrupted walk to the throne. The story would have been a fine one even there. The day a duke tried to take the throne by shoving, and a corporal held the aisle, and the realm cheered the corporal. I would have been glad to tell you only that. But the morning was not finished with us, because the young woman in white had been watching all of it, and she was about to do the thing that turned a saved coronation into a story the kingdom would tell its grandchildren. She came back down the aisle. She had walked half its length already on her slow tide toward the dais, and she had stood and watched the whole of it in her perfect stillness. And now, with the Duke being folded out the west doors and the Lord Chamberlain raising his staff to signal the organ, Ilara, not yet crowned, not yet anointed, still only the eldest child of a dead king, gathered the front of her white gown in one hand and turned around, away from the throne, and walked back down the green carpet, against the whole direction of the morning, toward the chancel step and the corporal who had held it. You do not do this, I want that understood. The whole of a coronation is a machine of forward motion. The heir advances, never retreats. Every step is scripted and rehearsed and weighted with 800 years of doing it this way. For the heir to turn and walk back down the aisle was as far outside the order of the morning as the Duke's shove had been a breaking of the shape. And for a confused instant, I think half the abbey feared some new disaster, that the day was unraveling entirely. It was not unraveling, it was finding its true center. She stopped in front of Tam Holloway. She was not a tall woman. She had to look up a little to find his face under the great bearskin. And Tam, who had not moved his eyes for a man who threatened to flog him, who had not moved them for a man who shoved him and grabbed his rifle and screamed at 3,000 witnesses that he was a painted servant. Tam Holloway looked down. He brought his eyes off the middle distance and down to the young woman in white standing before his post, because she was about to be his queen, and because some stillness is rightly broken, and he looked at her and waited. "What is your name, Corporal?" she asked. Her voice was low and very steady, and it carried in that hush all the way to the back of the abbey. "Holloway, ma'am," Tam said, the first words he had spoken in the whole ordeal. "Corporal Tam Holloway." "Corporal Holloway," she said. "You stood between me and a man who would have taken what is not his. You did it without raising a hand against him. You did it knowing what he could cost you." She paused, and I saw her gather something, the way you gather yourself before lifting a weight. "I have not yet been crowned. In an hour I will be your queen, and I will not be able to say this to you the way I can say it now, as one person to another, before any of it begins. So I will say it now. and she inclined her head to him, the bow not of a sovereign to a subject but of a person to a person, and she said simply, "Thank you for holding the road." Then she straightened, and turned, and walked back up the aisle to be crowned, and Tam Holloway brought his eyes back to the middle distance, and the morning resumed its 800-year shape as though it had never broken at all. I will not pretend I kept my composure through the bow. I am a corporal of 11 years, and I stood my post like a man, but there was water in my eyes, and I let it stay there, because some things are owed, and a few clean tears at the chancel step of the Crown Abbey are a cheaper coin than the dignity that earned them. Down the whole length of the aisle I saw the 40 stand a half-inch taller. We had been, all morning, the banks of the river. For one moment the river had turned and thanked the banks, and a man does not get many mornings like that in a life of standing still. The crowning, when it came, was the most beautiful I have ever seen, and I think it was beautiful precisely because of what had nearly destroyed it. The organ took up its broken chord and finished it. The choir sang. Ilara completed her interrupted walk and knelt, and was anointed, and the old crown that Garrick Sorrel had reached for across the body of a sentry was lifted from its cushion and set, with both the Lord Chamberlain's trembling hands, upon the head of the rightful queen. And when she rose and turned to face the realm, crowned, 3,000 people came to their feet with a roar that shook 800 years of dust out of the vaulting. And I swear to you, the loudest part of that roar came from the lesser seats, from the old soldier in his one good coat who had called out "Hold the line," and from the ordinary people of the kingdom who had watched a duke try to take a throne by shoving, and had watched a corporal refuse to let him. You will want to know what became of the duke. He was not flogged. He did not flog anyone. The queen, in one of the first acts of her reign, refused every harsh sentence her ministers urged on her: no block, no tower, no stripping of his ancient name. He has already lost the only thing he ever wanted, she said, in front of every person whose regard he was trying to win. Let that be the sentence. I will not make him a martyr by making him a prisoner. And so Garrick Sorrel was simply sent home to his cold western house, his titles intact and entirely worthless, to live out his years as the man who, on the morning of the crowning, tried to take the throne by shoving a sentry and was held by a corporal without a blow struck. The story went everywhere. It went into the ballads the children sing in the marches now, and in every one of them Garrick Sorrel is not a tyrant or a villain. He is a joke, a cautionary figure, the proud old fool who learned in front of the whole world that a throne is not a thing you can shove your way into. There is no flogging in the kingdom that would have ruined him a tenth as thoroughly as that. A proud man can survive being feared. He cannot survive being laughed at by the grandchildren of the people he despised. He died 4 winters later, I heard, and the only crowd at his gate was the curious. And you will want to know about Tam. He was offered everything, and he took none of it. The queen would have made him a captain on the spot. He asked, with great respect, to remain a corporal at his post, because he was a corporal and it was his post, and he could not see what the mourning had to do with either. They tried to give him a medal struck specially for it, the Isle of Orenhull in fine gold. He accepted it because refusing the queen twice is more than a man's allowed, and then he kept it in a drawer and wore it not once, and stood his next watch in his ordinary ribbons as though nothing had occurred. I asked him about it, weeks after in the guardroom, the only time I ever pushed him to speak of it. "Why didn't you take the captaincy, Tam?" I said. "You earned it 10 times over. You'd be set for life. Your boys." "My boys," he said, "are going to grow up knowing their father held his post on the morning it mattered and asked for nothing after. That's worth more to them than a captain's pay, and it'll last longer." He turned his cup in his hands. He was quiet a while. Then he said the thing I have carried with me ever since, the thing that explained the whole of that morning at last, the empty rifle let go, the eyes that would not move, the half-pace into the gap. "Everyone watching that aisle thought I was guarding a throne," Tam said. "I wasn't. The throne can look after itself. It's a chair. I was guarding the rule that says the chair isn't yours just because you want it badly enough. That's the only thing that was ever really under threat that morning, not the crown, the idea that a crown can't be taken by force. If I'd stepped aside, the chair would still have been there. But the rule would have been gone, and a kingdom is nothing but its rules, kept by ordinary men when no one's making them. So I held. It wasn't brave. It was just my turn to be the one standing on it. I have thought about that more times than I can count. We tend to believe the great moments belong to the great people, to the queen in her white, to the duke in his ruin, to the crown and the choir and the 800 years. But the whole of that morning, the entire fate of a coronation, turned on whether one quiet corporal with a wife and 2 boys and an empty rifle would hold a half-pace of green carpet against a powerful man who wanted to take it. He held. The kingdom was crowned because he held. And he went home that night and bathed his youngest and did not mention it, because to Tam Holloway it was simply the watch, kept the way the watch is always kept, by the man whose turn it was. The queen reigns still, well and justly, and her people love her, and the city tells the tale of her crowning every year on the day. But the part of it I stand for, the part I'd want a younger guardsman to take from this if he takes anything, is not the crown coming down or the duke going out the west doors in disgrace. It is the corporal at the chancel step, eyes forward, letting an empty rifle go to save a morning, having harmed no man and moved no inch, and a young woman in white turning around against the whole weight of a coronation to walk back down the aisle and thank the road for holding. A throne is a chair. It can be reached in the end only by those who will not seize it. That is the rule Tam Holloway held that morning with his empty hands, and it is the reason the throne the Duke tried to take by shoving was never, for one instant, in danger of being his.